It's going to be a blue wave. It's going to be a red tsunami. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your right angle on the upcoming elections. And as you know by now, it's our job here at BillWhittle.com to make sure that everyone is kept in a state of hysterical tension at all times. And certainly this is our mission today. So with just a couple weeks before the midterm elections, what I thought I would do is just take a real simple thing. Everybody's always trying to parse this, and I'm going to win by this much, and I'm going to... And nobody knows. If it was a blue wave, I wouldn't be surprised. If it was a red tsunami, I wouldn't be surprised. If it was a yellow tie, I wouldn't be surprised. Nothing surprises me anymore. But what I'd like to do is this. Just briefly, I'm going to ask you guys both the same question. I'd like you to tell me what you think the world looks like after the election in the best case scenario of a big red win, and also the worst case scenario of a big blue win. You know, so we got all these things in the middle. Let's look at worst case, best case scenario. Steve, let's start with you. You can do them in whichever order you want. But when I say I mean like a red tide and a blue tide, a gigantic win for Democrats versus a gigantic win for Republicans.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to take kind of a contrary yet upbeat approach to this. If there is a red tsunami, a red tide, whatever we're calling it, I think the best case scenario, and I'm kind of sad to say this, is that not much changes. That's not such a bad thing. We've had a couple of good years. We've gotten some tax relief. We've gotten a lot of deregulation. And I think with an extra 2 years, maybe, just maybe, this Congress can finally get these deep state perpetrators in the various departments to produce some damn documents that have been subpoenaed. I would love to see that happen. But we would be looking at more of the same. And as somebody who writes and talks about politics all the time, it's not the most exciting outcome, surely. But that's not so bad, is it, really, if you think about it?
No.
I could definitely handle with 2 more years.
4% economic growth, it's a catastrophe.
Yeah. And then if there's this blue wave, the blue wave is not going to take the Senate. Texas is gone. Looks like North Dakota is gone. Well, when I say gone, I mean gone for the Democrats.
No. I mean, are you that confident about keeping the Senate?
I'm really confident about keeping the Senate.
Well, then right. For the sake of the argument, tell me what happens if we lose the Senate and the House.
Okay, well, if we lose the Senate, oh boy, that means Mitch McConnell's justice approval machine comes to a grinding halt. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and maybe Breyer go, and Trump has to nominate somebody that can get through the Senate, or, and this wouldn't be so bad, we function with a 7-man Supreme Court for a couple of years.
Betcha. What an amazing government.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen. Oh, it wouldn't be bad at all, because it would be 5-2, right? Hey, I like that outcome. There was something else. What was it? I want to talk about the states, though. Texas, North Dakota, Montana, Arizona, and Nevada are all looking pretty good for the GOP. And it's a tough map for the Democrats this year, so I don't worry about the Senate. But if we do, worst comes to worst is we've got a short Supreme Court that is 5-2 Republican. The House side, geez. The bad news is the deregulation comes to a halt. We're gonna get spending bills that are just gonna make you cry.
Everything comes to a halt, right? Everything just stops.
Yeah,
that's it.
And this Republican Congress they've done some good work, but they've been completely spendthrift. The numbers just came out: $780 billion deficit fiscal year just ended, and it's mostly peacetime with 4% growth, and we're still borrowing, most of $1 trillion with great conditions. It's just it's sad what the GOP has done here, how they failed us on that. That aside, if the Democrats win this, you know what starts the day after Election Day? The campaign for 2020 begins, and it's Trump versus Pelosi. And the tweets are going to astound you. The TV interviews are going to blow your mind. It's going to be great. One of the things I love about Trump is, just like his big supporters, his earliest supporters were telling us, he fights. He's going to start taking the fight to him on November 9 if they take the House. And it's going to be a thing of beauty to behold, I think.
Scotty, I want to ask you again, best case, worst case. So when I say worst case, I mean lose the House and Senate. I'm talking about a blue wave. But before I do that, before I do that, I would like to get your take on one thing that Steve brought up, and that's interesting, and that is just the brilliance of the structure of this government. Not how it's operated, but the structure of it. In other words, they don't get to have a palace coup, right? Yes, they have the ability to, if they win the House and the Senate, they have the ability to impeach and remove the president, but that doesn't mean it's Hillary Clinton, it means it's Mike Pence, right? And yes, they could say, well, we're not going to pass any more conservative judges, then that's fine. We'll just stay with a 5-2 court, fine. What do you make of that aspect of the genius of the elasticity of this thing? Elastic and at the same time structured in such a way that you simply cannot undo the will of the people quite that easily.
It's like a fighter plane or a rocket with redundant systems built into it.
Yeah, that's well said.
Oh, yes.
That's what I love about it. It's like, even if the framers of the Constitution, if nothing else, they were not perfect men. They were very smart men. They were very well read, probably more well read than anybody you know today in person. But they weren't perfect men. And one of the things that was ingenious about them was their realization that they were not perfect men. And they assumed, as most of us do, that they were about the best men that could possibly have come along. And they certainly should be the kind of guys who would be deciding these sorts of things, like what goes in the Constitution. I mean, you and I, if we were at the convention, would think the same things of ourselves. But they had enough humility to say, wow, if I, a great man, am so prone to fall, to err in judgment, to get caught up in my own little agenda, to the neglect of other things that are important, if I do that, imagine the kind of scoundrels that are going to come after me. We better build a system that prevents them from destroying this country.
You betcha.
And so because of that, you can, when you say, well, what's the worst case scenario? You wake up the day after the election and the Democrats have swept anything. You know what happens? I get up, I take a shower, I shave, I brush my teeth,
good.
I drive to work, I do my job.
The black helicopter comes. It takes you to the re-education camp. You make a full apology before Big Brother before they shoot you in the back of the head.
The aliens take me by night. I am probed. It's just things go on, and we forget that sometimes because in some ways this is the most important midterm election in a generation, or that some of us have ever seen. In other ways, this whole thing is like fantasy football for ugly people. And, we just have this idea that it's the most important thing in the world. But most of our friends who are not engaged in this kind of daily consumption and regurgitation of news and commentary, they've got more important things to think about. They're worried that their kid's on drugs. They're worried that their kid won't get into the good school. They're busy trying to run everybody around to everything, and they've got to pick some new tile for the kitchen, and they just can't decide between these two different shades. And this is how real people live. The rest of us are, in a way, caught up in a show. We're like part of the Truman Show, where there's this artificial atmosphere that we're being raised in, and we think that it's the real world, but really we're surrounded by a bunch of actors. And every once in a while, we need to bump up against the wall of that hemisphere dome and realize that, hey, wow, there's life out there. There are people out there. There's love out there. There's friendship, and there's relationship, and there's agreement, and there's joy. And so I think that's what I wake up to the day after a big blue wave. It's also what I wake up to the day after a big red wave. That said, on a political basis, I think you get even more ugliness if it goes all blue, because President Trump is not going to, lay down and roll over. And if it goes all red, I think you're going to see some of the sort of sharp edges, the sharp elbows that the president has had, but I think you're going to also see a little bit more magnanimous of a guy, because he can afford to be, because he can get what he wants. But unless the Democrats think that they're going to pull off a sweep like nobody is even talking about, in which case they have the ability to override presidential vetoes, then I don't think a blue wave is going to, play out the way they imagine. And I personally will agree with Steve. I think Republicans hold the Senate, perhaps increase their majority. I don't think they lose 23 seats in the House. In fact, I think they may pick up a couple of seats. I think this goes a lot better because people have consistently over the years voted for the party in power when the economy is good. And so far, it's hitting on all cylinders. And I would be stunned to see anything less than Republicans holding their majority in both houses.
From your lips, Scott.
Scott, as always, you brought perspective and decency and civility into the argument, and you're fired. So let me go to where we to that screaming pitch of hysteria that we all find ourselves so attracted to these days. And when I say best case and worst case, the reason I pick these is because I think these are the outer limits of what could happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Yeah. We all want to know. That's why we talk politics. That's why we talk sports. We don't like uncertainty. We can't stand it. It's unbearable. We want somebody to give us either some good news or some bad news, but tell us get us out of the gray zone. So when I say the best case and worst case scenarios, I'm trying to find some sort of these are like the gutters on the side of the bowling alley. The ball's not going to go down the edge of either one of these gutters. It's going to go somewhere in the middle, but to get the idea. Yeah. So I think best case, worst case looks like this. Worst case scenario is you lose the House and the Senate. Not by a supermajority. You lose the House and the Senate. The Democrats are on fire like they've never been before, and they come out and so on. If you lose the House, it's pretty simple. You lose the House, Donald Trump impeachment proceedings will start against Donald Trump and probably against Kavanaugh as well. If you lose the House and the Senate, these impeachment proceedings on both cases will lead to the removal of those two gentlemen from office. I don't think there's much question about it. I really don't. They have a blood vendetta against both of them now. And I think you can count on impeachment if we lose the House and impeachment and removal if we lose the House and Senate. I really do.
You got to get a supermajority for that conviction, though.
Do they?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, 67 votes.
Then it's essentially we got Donald Trump till 2020, thank God. But if we lose the House, then we don't get anything done. And they don't get anything done either. That's probably the realistic worst case. They take one of the houses or even both of them, but they don't get anything done because Trump overrides the legislation with the veto. Okay, so nothing good happens, but nothing particularly bad happens either. You're stuck for 2 years. But what interests me more is the best case scenario where you maintain both houses and perhaps even increase the majority. But I don't think we're going to see super majority, so just say we hang on to them both. If we get out there and vote and we hang on to them both, then a bunch of really interesting things happen. First of all, instead of a year of 4% economic growth, we have 3 years of 4 or more % economic growth when it comes time for re-election of the president. And it's his tax policies that have created this incredible boom. And people care about things like paychecks and so on. So winning now makes it easier to win in the future, and that's something very, very worthwhile. But I look at this election coming up as much more of a moral and almost a philosophical, almost a religious kind of a thing, really. I think that we're going to find out whether or not the politics of political assassination work on the American people, yes or no. Because it's going to be the Kavanaugh election. And I really mean it's going to be the Kavanaugh election. For the left, it means you have to get out there and stop these Nazis from taking over the Supreme Court, which is the sole protection for the poor and the people of color in this country. And if we don't get out there and vote and get these things out, we're going to have more multiple rapists like Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court and Donald Trump and all the rest. This is what they believe. For us, it's the Kavanaugh election as well. If we win, given how far down we were prior to Kavanaugh and how energizing he's been because of just the sheer outrage that he's generated. If we win, then not only the other good things happen downstream, but basically we are doing two things. We're sending a message that this character assassination not only didn't work, it cost you the election. So what that does is it inoculates us against future character assassination attempts, because having seen the injustice of what they did to Kavanaugh, they try to play this card again, and they lose the election. Sweet, life gets better. But if we win, it does something else too, I think. It shows that there's still enough of this country that is on board with the idea that it can be saved, rather than we have to go and pack our beans and our ammunition and go up into the hills and wait for the inevitable collapse. Because you can restore a car that's been rusting out in the wind and the rain. You can take a car that is just essentially a rusty shell, and with enough care and attention, you can make it look better than it did when it rolled off the showroom floor. So that's what's at stake here. I want to vote in this election more than I wanted to vote in any election of my life, because it's the Kavanaugh election, which really means it's the morality election. It's the rule of law versus the rule of the mob. That's what 2018 election is about to me. It's law versus the mob. And while I won't be surprised either way, I hope and somewhat expect that large numbers of people who have been largely silent on this issue of both parties are going to come out and vote for the law. That's what I expect to happen, and that's what I hope will happen. And if you're not one of them and you're watching the show and you don't get out there and vote for the law, well then, shame on you. And I mean it. Shame on you. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, made possible by a very small number of extremely generous and extremely visionary people who keep these messages coming for everybody else to watch for free. And if you'd like to join us, we'd be happy to have you over at BillWhittle.com. We'll have a new website out in just a day or two, I think. And we will see you next week on Right Angle.